All right, now let's take a look at materials inside Maya. For what we're going to be doing for in Arnold, there isn't a whole lot of material that we need to worry about. I'm going to go back to assign new material, go back to the Arnold shader, and in here I'm going to go to that standard surface. And remember, right clicking and adding it to the favorites will bring it up to your favorites so you don't have to go through all the menus. So always give your stuff a name. So I'm going to call this plastic material. Okay. Some of the options we're typically going to play with is color. So if I give this a color like, blue or whatever. Oops. There we go. Something like this. And then I go through and render it out. I can see what that's going to look like. Now there's, obviously this is the blue I picked, but then this is white. This is actually coming from the reflection that I have in the scene. So the light that I have in the scene. So if I go in here to my settings, there's a couple things that I could play with. Number one I could play with is metalness. So maybe I like this effect. I want it to be maybe a little bit more reflective. I can pull this metalness, up further, and I'll get more of a reflection in it. You can actually see like the reflection kind of happening inside here. I'll pull this up just so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so I'm gonna hit stop, turn that off again, and then render that again. You'll see that we don't see it as clear as it was before. Okay, so that's an option. Maybe we want more of that effect, kind of happening in here. That's a way to do it. Another thing we can do is come down here to roughness, and we can pull this number up. Okay, so we pull that number of roughness up. You'll see how that reflection has now become diffuse. So it's not going to be as white up here. It's definitely a softer blue than it was before. And that roughness just basically takes the reflection and blurs the reflection. Okay, so typically when I do a scene like this, I'm going to grab the color, play with the metalness. So if it is like a metal material, I'll pull that up. And then come down here and play with roughness. Now you could also adjust the coloring of the specular. If I pull that to black, we won't get any specular. So it's basically just like a flat blue. If I pull it up a little bit, you'll see we'll get some. Pull it up more, we'll get more of that. Okay. Playing with this IOR, we'll get more of that reflection happening around it. Pulling it down, to a certain point, we'll get more blue, and then we'll really hit this kind of like white area where we hit it again. Okay. Typically, you don't have to worry about the IOR. Typically, the roughness, the color, and the weight here, along with metalness and color here, are typically good enough. You may also want to play with transmission. So if this is a transparent object, I can pull the transmission up, and that will make it transparent. Now, because it's rough here, we're not seeing it like fully transparent like a piece of glass. I'm going to take the roughness down, and now we're seeing it more transparent. Now Arnold has a thing about it where it also wants you to click the item, go to the attribute editor for the shape, and under Arnold you would choose opaque off. And what that does is it just tells Arnold that it is a non-opaque object. And typically things work better when you do that. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, like it just, even though you have transparency up all the way, it just doesn't work. And so that's something you may want to play with. There is also a roughness here, so you can still make this glass roughness. You can also take the color of this and give it a different color, so let's say green. Now I have this kind of green looking glass. I can play with the depth of it. Okay, most of these settings we don't need to worry about too much just because of the nature of the assignments for animation. We're really just kind of focusing on the animating and giving some basic material so that we can see it. Okay. And then maybe we'll come up here and just add a little bit of roughness there, pull this down. Too much roughness. Okay, and you can combine obviously a lot of these. Most of the stuff here, it takes time to tweak it. I want a little bit more roughness, a little bit more transparency, a little bit less metalness, whatever it is. You just keep playing around with it until you get the look you're after. And then the other side of this is, let's close that. As you do a texture, it's always good to look at it from other angles, the other angles you might see this thing from, because you may find that it's turning out a little bit different than you originally expected when you look at it from a different angle. And that's one of the nice things about Arnold is as you move around the camera, as long as that play button's hit, you can still preview your stuff. So you can see from way up here, we get very little white, but then as we come down, we're getting a lot of white in there. Okay, and that has to do with the angle that it's reflecting. All right. So some other materials that you may want to utilize with yours. I'm going to hold down the space bar again to get to the hotbox. Go to Assign New Material. Under the Arnold shader, I'm going to go to the utility, AI utility. And in here, you can actually pick from different items. So one of these is Ambient Occlusion. And this is something that in the first class you may have used. I'm going to go to Assign Existing Material and do that utility. And right now it's just whiting it out, and there's too much of this, so let's just turn that to 0.1. Let's see. That should be fine. Color. Maybe I'll make the distance smaller, so maybe I'll take this to 10. Yeah, it's starting to come in a little bit. It's at 5,000. Yes. All right, so not really seeing a whole lot there for this specific scene. I jump to a new scene just so we can kind of preview that, which is not always a bad thing to do. Sometimes you'll get some kind of unexpected behavior because of other things you have in the scene. So I'm just going to go to Assign a New Material, AI Utility. And then let's choose Ambient Occlusion. There we go. And so now we're getting this Ambient Occlusion rendering out of this one. Which is, again, it could be a neat kind of look that you use for your stuff. Especially if you gave it a color, then you get this kind of like flat, chalky look to it. Okay. And I can pull that distance down some. That should crisp it up a bit. There it goes. So now we see that dark line right there. And again, it could be just a neat way to do it. I could also put on top of this the wireframe or poly wire. And that could be, again, a neat way to kind of show off my model. For animation, again, focus on the animation. But if there is an instance that calls for something like that, that's where you would do it. Okay. Now for some of your models, you may have too many materials. There's so much stuff going on, you just can't keep track of all the things that are there. So in this instance, I have this character, Andy, and I want to see all the materials that are on here. If I go to the hotbox, and I go to Lighting and Shading, I can go to Assign Existing Materials, and here's all the materials that are here. Okay. Now I may want to see what those look like. So I'm going to go up here to the top right where it says the blue circle, which is this hypershade. And inside here, these are all the different materials that are inside of this Andy file. I need to make this just a bit bigger so I can actually move around. There we go. Now, if I go to Andy Cornea, I can click on this, and then I can click on these double arrows. It'll actually show me this is what Andy's cornea material looks like. And you'll see here's that standard surface, here's the coloring, here's the specular, transmission, so on. Andy's eyes, I'll click on this. And this one has a bit more setup. This is actually using a ramp to control that material. Here's Andy's iris. This is a huge setup to get that iris to work. Here's Andy material. Okay, so very easily I can see the items inside here. I could also, if I clicked on an item out in my view, and I'll just make an item, and I right click on it, I can assign the material to it, or I can middle drag the item on top of it, or I can hotbox lighting, shading, assign existing, and pick the item from here, and it'll all work on there. Okay. For some items, we obviously want to have some sort of texture to them. So just like you saw in that Andy one, I'm going to go to assign existing, or assign favorite material now, standard surface. And instead of giving this a flat color, we may want to assign a texture or a pattern to it. So if I click on the little map right here, just like I did on the HDR, if I have a file, I can bring in the file. Typically, something I use a lot is a ramp, so I'm going to click on ramp. And this is going to give me a start and an end for my ramp, okay, just like you would see gradients. I don't see anything happening on my item here, so I'm going to hit the number 6, and that will show me that ramp. Now I can adjust where this is positioned. Maybe I'll change this from interpolation linear to none, and now I get this like straight line. Here is the color that I have. Here's the position. If I click on the black one, here's the color, here's the position. I can simply click on that, click here, and then change the color. I can click in the middle of one of these and then add a new one and change that color. And you'll also notice that there's maps connected to these. So not only can you connect maps to items, but you can connect maps to maps. So this selected color here, which is pink, I can click on that, add another ramp, change this to none. I'm going to change this also to a U ramp, which is going to be a little bit different. And you'll see that this one's actually going to go like sideways. And if I change the colors here, let's just do red and blue. There we go. So now I have this like red, white, blue stripe going down the middle of that. And again, it's a neat way to be able to show that off without creating a material inside of Photoshop or something and bringing it in. Now you may see that it's kind of grainy and like blurry looking. That all goes away when you render it. So when I hit this light at a skydome light, and then I go to render, we should see a nice crisp line happening right down here and around this as well. Okay. If you want to get rid of a material, you just go to the attribute editor, right click on the word, not here, not there, right click right on the word color or whatever, and you can break the connection, and now that goes away, and then you have the freedom to adjust that color again. If you wanted to bring a material back in there, the Hypershade has everything that we've done so far. So here's the ball material, here's the textures, here they are. So ramp 2, that's the one that has the stripes. Ramp 1 is everything together. So just like I middle drag a material, I can middle drag a texture onto the color, and now it's reconnected back into it. And now I can re-see that on top of this. Okay, so not a whole lot that we need to worry about as far as textures go for doing this kind of stuff. But obviously, the more you know about textures, the more realistic your materials can be, and you know, more impressive your animation can be if it calls for it. So that's the basics of your materials.